But of course, the first time I'm back in 3 years in person, because the past 2 years have been virtual. And it is really, really nice to be back in person. I think you can see everyone. There was so much talk about how the pandemic was going to completely and fundamentally change the way that we interacted, that we may never go back to these types of events. I think it really shows that humans were made to be together in person, and certainly will take advantage of that kind of the technology, the efficiencies that offers. Getting back together in person is just extraordinary. And the moment that we all have it back when we were put on each other's microphones is a perfect example. That's a bonding experience that you would not be able to do over Zoom or Teams. So it is really, really exciting to be here. And it is, and I want to say a couple of things in introduction, and that is that, first of all, thanks to Gina Davis, thanks to Madeline, thanks to Wendy and their teams for this event. It's still the largest diversity film festival in the world, I think, and with such a young age, the numbers of people that it attracts here in Bentonville is absolutely fantastic. And also keeping it going during the 2 years of the pandemic, and where so many events just really suffered, the quality of what you were able to put together virtually was really rather extraordinary, and made us come back, I think, as strong as we come back. So thank you for that, and I was honored to be a part of that. This is absolutely more fun than talking to a screen. So I think, as you know, the panel here is all female panel, which makes me very excited. We were just talking about that. Female executive leaders at the top of their game, at the top of their careers, and bringing unique geographic perspectives in many ways. And we'll hear about that all the way down under. We'll hear about that when we hear from people's buyers. But lived experiences, ethnic experiences, I'm guessing socioeconomic as well. And bringing a real diversity of perspectives to the jobs that they do in their drive for purpose-driven progress for these iconic brands for whom they work. And I have to say, it is really such a pleasure, because having been to a million panels and watched a million panels, to be the only man among 4 female panelists, because how many times do you see panels that have no women, certainly sometimes no people of color, and no women of color? And so we've just knocked it out of the park. Again, that's testament to those who organize the event on all of those fronts. And so I just wanted to really acknowledge that. So it's really an honor to be here with all of you. And rather than me reading the bios, which always feels like they're attending your own funeral, I'm going to have each of them just tell us in a few words about themselves. So we'll start at the end with Monica.
Hello, wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me. I am Monica Gil. I am the Chief Administrative and Marketing Officer for NBC Telemundo Enterprises, and I'm happy to be here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Valerie Love. I serve as the Senior Vice President of Human Resources North America at the Coca-Cola Company. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm happy to be here as well. Thank you for having us.
Hi there, Jean Bethany. I am the Chief Creative Officer at Walmart. About a year into this role, so still a lot of learning. This is my first Bentonville Film Festival, so really, really excited to be here. And I live in Los Angeles, originally from New York. Have teams across the country, so get a really diverse perspective and diversity of thought.
Hi everyone, I'm Jane Huang. I'm the Global Vice President of M&M's. My accent's Australian, as we referenced earlier. It's my first time in Bentonville. Dang, it's hot here. My favorite American phrases I picked up. My first time at the Bentonville Film Festival. Thrilled to be here.
And actually, now I want to go back to make you realize when we talked about diversity, also so many of you live in so many places. Wait, Monica, just say where you live now and the other place, and where you're from, and the other cities you live in.
Yeah, terrific. I live in Miami. My home base is Los Angeles and Santa Barbara, where I am born and raised with 12 siblings, believe it or not. So that's still considered home. And I spent a lot of time in New York and Washington, D.C. as well.
Yeah, again, I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia. I've actually moved 9 times in my corporate career, 2 times international. Just recently moved to Atlanta before the pandemic from Jersey, but Tennessee is my home.
And dang, it's hot in Atlanta too.
It's real hot. There's a song about that.
I was born in New York, spent most of my life and career there, spent a long time in Europe studying. Did a short stint in Chicago where it was really cold, and so maybe the West. So again, based in Los Angeles, but
actually lived in, I've been in the US for 5 years in Chicago, and I spent about 8 years in Europe as well, Denmark, Netherlands, the UK, etc. All very cold countries and terms.
Yeah.
Or cities.
And I was born in Denver, so I was born in Akron, Ohio, and but my mother, Chinese American, was born in Chinatown, Los Angeles, and she and my African American father moved back to Los Angeles, so that's when I was 3 months old. And then moved there, lived in Washington, D.C., for NBC, lived in New York for a bit, lived in Columbus, Ohio, and I bring that up specifically because that was the first time I had not lived in a major, in a large city, and it just gave me such a love for the Midwest and for how nice people are, and just what a difference. And also that's, as we know, where the majority of the country lives, and as marketers, I think that's something you'll talk about too, that you understand that. All right. Well, thank you for that. I just think that we just talked about like 15 different cities, so I think that's fun. Jane, we're going to start with you. There are few brands as recognized as beloved and that people think is their own as M&Ms. I mean, people have a connection from the time they were a small child. So when your company took on this really rather, one could say, risky sort of task of reimagining them, I think we'd love to hear about the hundreds of meetings and the thousands of hours and the discussions, because you've got to get it right, because if you get it wrong, people feel betrayed, and that can really damage the brand. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Sure can. I'll try and give you a couple of the inside stories as well. So for those of you who may be a bit less familiar with the program, back in January of this year, M&M's announced its purpose and mission to create a world where everyone feels they belong. M&M's has been around for 80 years. It's been long committed to all kinds of colourful fun for everyone. So actually our purpose was really a more concrete commitment of what we've always believed, that despite our differences, fun is something that we all share and really unifies us and includes us. As part of that, we wanted to ensure the expression of our purpose was very visible across all our touch points, programs, initiatives, and that came with a brand new look and feel. I'll start with the less talked about ones per se. We expanded our colour palette from what was historically more yellow and brown to really show the full rainbow within our brand. You will start to see more than just the milk chocolate lentil. We have beautiful diversity in the different chocolate lentils we celebrate. Your favourite might be peanut, minis, peanut butter, milk, and you'll start to see that come through as well. And I can't not talk about our beloved M&M's characters. Yes, we spent a lot of time discussing how do we evolve them to better represent the modern world that we're living in. And to your point, we had a lot of dialogue because we wanted to get it right. And we always keep people and pets at the centre of everything we do at Mars. And so we spent a lot of time speaking to consumers across all different diversities, internal and external experts, to really make sure we are getting it right. And actually, yes, there was a lot of conversation about footwear, attire, etc., etc. And it's certainly, the response we had from January. I'll give you the inside story. You wake up January 20, just to give you the background. It was a press release and probably the most cost-effective film I've ever made. You wake up and go, I wonder if anyone's going to pick this up. 6 a.m. I was like, CNN picked it up. That's nice. Okay, maybe people are less interested. Fast forward 5 days later, upwards of 9 billion impressions across all the markets of the world. It really
9 billion?
9 billion. 9 billion across so many markets. My phone has never been running that hot in my life anyway. And it was just a real concrete example of how much, still at 80 years on, that M&M's is a culturally relevant, iconic brand. And we saw just an incredible response to, what our purpose was as well. The area we spent most of our conversation, though, was on our acts, not just our ads. We really do mean we want to push the needle, make an impact. So we spent as much time talking about what are the acts that we're doing, and we've established for the first time the M&M's Fund, which offers resources, financial support, mentorship, in terms of really helping people feel like they can belong in arts and entertainment. That's exactly why we're here as well this week. We're awarding for the first time the M&M's for All Fun Kind Award on Saturday. I cannot reveal who the winner is, but it is at Bentonville. We'll be absolutely sharing that in terms of a diverse filmmaker, $20,000 grant, as well as the opportunity to work with us. on a culturally inclusive program. So
Wow.
lots of conversation around all of those elements.
So I would say that the consensus must be that you got it right.
Overall, I mean, the truth of it is, when it's out there in the real world, in social commentary, you see the full breadth of conversation. Overall, we absolutely feel that we did get it right, but it would be remiss of me to say that everyone was always supportive as well. It's a dialogue.
I followed a little bit about this, and I think as an M&M aficionado, I was very interested in this. But the footwear you mentioned, and there are, not to get too far down that rabbit hole, but there are people who objected to changing what was more traditionally feminine footwear to what was considered less, gender specific. And taking a look at that as just part of the dialogue that everyone's having about everything, I think I realized. But what that made me realize is, to me, if I were sitting at Mars, I'd be like, well, that's a win, because if people are getting that whipped up about something, it means that your product really matters to them.
Exactly. Could not have been more delighted about the conversation on the footwear.
Good. Well, thank you. Thank you. And we're talking about M&Ms. Let's be clear, it's a candy that's not even really a person, and people are getting very upset about the footwear. But I think again, that's how deeply they touch us.
Yeah.
Jean, so when we talk about, thank you for that, it is impossible to overstate Walmart's influence in the world, and certainly domestically, when you talk about the number of Americans and people worldwide that are touched every single day by your brand, either through a message or through being in your stores or through using one of your products. Given that responsibility, given that opportunity, how do you, as the Chief Creative Officer, bring diversity, equity, and inclusion into your work, this purpose-driven work that you do?
Excellent question. The size is amazing, right? The size and scope and the scale and the responsibility. And if you think about it, just simple numbers, 90% of US households shop with Walmart, and 90% of Americans live within 10 miles of a Walmart. So that is a large and diverse community of people that we serve. And so what's great about Walmart is our purpose was born with Sam Walton. So we have been in the purpose business since we started 60 years ago. This is our anniversary year. And we're in the business of helping people save money so they can live better. And so you think about it, what is live, and it couldn't be a better time right now.
Yeah.
with the inflation rates, with people that are suffering. We're listening to consumers constantly. People are having a hard time putting protein in their basket, right? So how are we taking this opportunity and this time to be there in the community for the community? And I think that's a key point, is like we're not just in the community, but we want to be for the community and how we help. And so that's our responsibility and our opportunity. And thinking about the creative expression of the brand, of how do we reflect those diverse communities that we serve, our people, all people, to help them live better, live beautifully, live sustainably, and live equitably. And so I think about content storytelling as a massive tool to reach people's hearts. We don't want to just be a transactional company. We want to be an emotional brand. And so how do we touch people in their hearts, minds, and spirits, right? And so thinking about being really intentional, and I call it radically focused on the consumer and on diverse talent. And so just to run through a few examples. We've made a commitment to minority-owned media partners and committing our spend on an annual basis, increasing that spend every year to be where our consumers are. We have made a commitment to 40% of the directors, producers, and crews that we work with to be women identifying and minority underrepresented directors and creative talent. We have partnered with our agency partners. We have a large, internal team and then lots of creative agency partners to commit to having the teams that work on our business reflect the diverse communities that we serve. So we want to make sure we've got race and gender and orientation and age and size and ability. So we're writing the stories and approving the stories and then making the stories together to reflect the communities we serve. So people feel seen and heard and represented at Walmart, to build that connection. We're also
partnering in the, we've built this was before my time, so I can't take credit for it, but I mean, obviously a massive team doing this work, but a diversity, equity, inclusion review board within the marketing group that are people from diverse groups across our company that reflect those diverse communities, we say, to screen all the work that we do. They screen the scripts, they screen the content and the stories and the experiences, so that we are making sure we're reflecting those communities authentically and screening for unconscious bias. So it's another stage in the process to be really, really intentional. We're also, as we focus on I'm focused on building more internal creative capabilities and ruthlessly looking at talent and diverse talent at the table. And so we're working with groups in the industry and sponsoring and showing up at conferences like the 3% conferences, which is focused on female creative leadership talent and expanded into more intersectional diversity. The One Club, which is a creative award show and education program, and they have Where Are All the Black People, which were started as, at a holiday party, where one black creative director said, hey, where are all the black people? And so we've got to really lean in intentionally to make sure we have all lenses on the work that we do. And then, helping also the industry create a pipeline of diverse talent, right? So I think, we know that we don't just want the work to go through a white male gaze. And we know it drives better business and better engagement and better authenticity and relationships. So pipelines of talent like one is the One Club, again, has a school called the One School, helping very specifically create a pipeline for black talent and through the industry. And then other groups like HUE, which represent all intersectional diversity, and another group called Ad Fellows. Sorry, I'm running through my mental list. Ad Fellows, where we bring in multicultural young marketers to come in and work with us and work with our different groups. So really kind of looking again, but through the lens of the consumer and talent, and making sure we start with deep insights and consumer truths, so we know our consumer, the diverse consumer, and then testing the work on the way out. Are we showing up authentically, working with groups like See Her and the ANA, and I was just talking with the founders of the Gina Davis Foundation, looking at the data, we've gone through all this process, how are we showing up, and are we reflecting the communities we serve authentically and well, and what can we do better? So asking ourselves, and I think about us being in the business of better. How are we better today than yesterday, and how are we going to be better tomorrow?
And I love that you mentioned data and you talked about the Gina Davis Institute, because that's what Gina has said as she was going, and she continues to go across the industry, and to say, women are not being represented as they should. They don't have the appropriate speaking roles. The men have 5 times as many lines, and women are being over-sexualized, and people are saying, no, we're much better. And then she shows them the data, and they say, oh my gosh, you're absolutely right. So data is so key. Yeah. And I love that you mentioned, I watch a lot of television, and Walmart ads are some of the very best. And the focus, I wrote it, this radically focused approach is very evident. And I have to say that I just think that, and I don't know if it's the time in which we find ourselves, your work, the work of your team, also the leadership of Doug McMillan, but it seems even more focused than it's ever been.
I think, thank you. Obviously it takes a village, and I think there is this intentional to evolve us from that transactional company to an emotional brand. And I talk about the real, right? We are humans helping humans, powered by technology and innovation, but human first. And I think, as we look at the work, does this feel human versus corporate? Does it feel like we're talking to each other, like neighbors?
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you
for that. So Valerie, you are senior HR leader. As an HR leader on our panel, also, you have this perspective that we'd love to hear. We've all been reading about, and in some cases experiencing in our companies, this great resignation. And I think some companies would say, oh my gosh, yes, it's incredible. And if you look at the data, it indicates that there is this great resignation going on. Then you talk to some other companies and say, actually, that hasn't been our experience. One, I'd like to hear what the experience has been, whatever you can share with us confidentially, at Coca-Cola, and how you are using the company's culture and focus on purpose-driven progress to engage and retain employees, because as we know, this is important not only to our employees of color and our female employees, but to younger employees, and our just more employees than ever want to be working for a company that is in line with their values, and if they don't feel they are, they often will vote with their feet. First of all, what did you experience, and how are you working to retain your people with this work?
Craig, that's an excellent and very timely question. I know we've all been through the ebbs and flows of the last 2.5 years, and I will tell you, as I mentioned, I started with the Coca-Cola Company in 2019 in August, and it was just before everything changed. And if someone had told me coming into this role that I would be faced with a pandemic, social injustice, a major restructure in the company, finding new ways of how we do work in this new climate, I would have said that's not even possible all at the same time. But what we quickly began to think about with the pandemic and all we were hearing about the Great Resignation was starting to listen a lot more to our associates about what they need, what the work experience needed to be. And our purpose is to refresh the world and make a difference. So with that as our overarching framework, we wanted to start listening, making sure the culture was right to retain talent in the organization in the midst of all of these things, because we went through a major restructure, the largest restructure of the Coca-Cola Company in the midst of a pandemic. So doing it virtually. So you couldn't give that heart and touch and feel to it that you would normally do in a
Was the restructure something that was long planned, or was it in response to the pandemic, or a combination of both?
It was planned before the pandemic, and we didn't slow it down.
Wow.
As the pandemic was approaching us. So it did take a lot of storytelling, to your point, the why. Really helping people to understand why we were on this journey, the implications of it, and the opportunities that could be afforded, but there would be some reductions that would happen, and helping people to really wrap their head around how they could reimagine. So instead of the Great Resignation, it was about the Great Reimagination of what work looks like, and being able to do that in a virtual environment, because we were bringing on new talent from outside of the company, and we had internal talent. How do you do that in a way that the culture doesn't suffer? Because there's something about, and Pam's here in the audience on the leadership team with me, it's the real magic of Coke. So being able to talk about the opportunities to have your voice heard, to feel like you can belong, because belonging is a big part of making the right culture for an organization. So we had to be very intentional. We did a lot of listening sessions. We did a lot of fact finding. Data helped us to tell a story about how we could retain the best talent and attract capabilities and skills we may not have in the organization. But once we get talent to the organization, it's about the work of retaining them through development, through learning opportunities, through innovation, to being able to think about how they do their work very differently. So we've been on this journey. We love to call it a journey because there's no end to this, because we need to continue to think about what does the workforce of the future look like. We talk a lot about getting associates back into the new ways of working, a hybrid work environment, coming back into the office, and being very thoughtful about what our associates are saying, because in Atlanta, for example, we have really sexy companies moving in. We like to call them sexy because they're the tech companies, the Googles, the Twitter, the Facebook. All of these companies are moving in, and they're offering some really nice packages. So it has to be more than about the compensation. It has to be about the opportunities to grow and to develop. The culture is right, the magic is right when they're in the office, but they still feel like they can be developed in the right way even if they're not in the office, because we've always had remote workers. That's not new for us. But it is new for us of how do you engage in a very intentional way when we've got this hybrid and flexible workforce. Because we know that if we don't create that flexibility, there are so many other opportunities. And now with the companies moving into Atlanta, for example, they don't even have to relocate. So we have to be thoughtful and forward thinking about what is the future of work and what do we want from our associates and what do the associates want from us as a company.
I don't think I realized you had all of those companies coming with a major physical presence in Atlanta, which makes, because I know we're all grappling with some of these sexy companies. And I mean, I like to think that NBC Universal still has a certain amount of appeal, but it's an older company, and when you compare it to some of these other companies, the tech companies, and you're right, some of the offers they're making are very hard to compete with, and sometimes you just have to say, okay, maybe that is where you need to go. If that is the real determining factor, one of the things we've seen, I'm curious to know if anyone else has seen this, is that we did lose some people, and people certainly can make the choices they need to make for their lives, but we've gotten some of the boomerangs. They've come back because of what we hope are the cultural things that they are missing.
Yeah, we didn't have a mass exit. We did have a few people that thought about work-life balance and having the opportunity to step back and really prioritize what's important in their lives, made some conscious decisions about, this is where I'd like to make a pivot and do something very different. But we didn't have a mass exit, but we started preparing for the event, especially with our diverse population, which we're trying to make sustainable change in that area. We got very intentional about reaching out, talking to our associates that may be on the fence or considering other opportunities, make sure we're wrapping our arms around them to just remind them that, there is a place for you to grow and develop at the Coca-Cola Company. But we didn't, luckily, experience that. But every now and then we get a resignation that kind of causes us to sit up straight, to say.
And makes you think, okay, I need to take this seriously, and what does that indicate? So it doesn't become a wave.
Right.
Thank you for that. And you brought up something that we're going to come back to a little bit later, because I really love this one issue that you brought up. Monica, who has been a dear friend for many years. I knew Monica back when I was still at NBC. I mean, I was already at NBC, and you were, okay. Whatever, Monica. You were at Nielsen. You were already an executive. You look great, but you were not 10. All right, so let's just be super clear. But you were working for Nielsen then, and I was introduced to you by Bill Amata, a dear friend. He said you have to know Monica now. It's so great to have you, of course, for this many years in the NBCU family. And you have a unique viewpoint on this because you are working at Telemundo, and so you have a specific targeted audience, the Hispanic audience. But what we also, of course, know is that is not a monolith. I mean, it just like the Asian American audience, it could not be sort of more diverse in a way and made up of so many different groups. Hondurans versus Mexicans versus Cubans versus Dominicans. So how do you, with this purpose-driven work, manage that? Because you're trying to come out with some kind of a unified message that speaks to the larger Hispanic community, but doing it in such a way and in a targeted way so that you're also touching on these communities that are very proud of their own identity and don't want to be considered just part of the larger Hispanic community.
Yeah, no, it's such a great question, and thank you for bringing that up, because I think when you work in this space for a specific segment, you really are seen as a group that's all the same. And the reality is that we come in different hues, we speak different languages, we have different preferences. Before I jump into that, I just want to note something that I heard all of you say here today, which I thought was very interesting. As I'm hearing you speak, I was just taken back to when we used to talk about diversity and inclusion. Back 20 years ago, even 15 years ago, 10 years ago, it used to be about access, right? It used to be about how do you get access and how the conversation I'm hearing it has evolved. Now it really is, to me, whether it be the product, whether it be the content, whether it be an employee, it's not just about access, it's about inclusion and it's about outcomes. So it used to be about tolerance and access, and now it's about inclusion and outcomes. And it really reminds me of why and what our job as a company is. And to answer your question, it's about inclusion. How do you make sure that whether you're the Puerto Rican in New York, the Mexican in LA, or the Cuban in Florida, that you feel included in all of our purpose, everything that our company is doing? We are a company that is based in the United States. We do content for US Latinos by US Latinos. So it's absolutely critical and relevant that we are making sure that every hue of Latino, every country of origin is represented in the work that we do. And it's not something easy, but it's something that kind of comes quite naturally. Because we're a media company, we are fortunate because we also have the ability to provide news and information. And when you provide news and information to a community, you're able to create a purpose because they rely on you for information, for accurate information, for timely information. And in our case, many times our audience used our channels of communication as a way to help them navigate through systems that were foreign or new. So we're a trusted source. So because of that, this isn't just something that we're doing on a daily basis. We need to make sure that we are talking to them in the language of the preference that they choose, the platform that they choose, and the comfort zone. We have to find ways to go where they work, live, and play. And the way that we do that is we have to also make sure that we are trying to find a unifying message. But what I find with the audiences specifically is that it kind of comes down to two things. It has to be transparent, and it has to be the way it's implemented. So why did I go that? For us, as we're looking at purpose-driven initiatives, we know that we kind of have to take three things in mind. One, we have to be authentic, because we know that our audiences are immediately going to know when you're telling them the truth and when you're not. We have a very intelligent community, and they're able to see right through you when you're not telling them the truth. And that's something that I think in the past we used to push our product out, and now it's truly try to be true and authentic to what their needs are and what their demands are. Secondly is I think you also have to make sure that you are very actionable. There's so many wonderful ideas, and a lot of them come from our employees. There's so many admirable causes. But at the end of the day, I always like to say not every good idea is great, because not every idea is actionable. So if you can't implement it, it's very difficult to make sure that you feel that the community or that the employee or that the audience feels they're being serviced, because you can't execute against it. And you have to be honest with yourself as an organization whether or not you can execute against it. And last, you have to be accountable. I come from Nielsen, we talk about data. We used to say what gets measured gets done. Now I like to say what gets measured gets improved, because the data is able to give you that information, and data is accountability. Are you delivering on what you committed to your community that you would be delivering? So when you look at how you propose purpose-driven content or purpose-driven initiatives for the organization, I believe that if you're able to touch on those three things, your employees are going to feel gratified and grateful for the work that you're doing, but they're going to want to be part and join, right? We did a tremendous, wonderful campaign, Craig, that you probably saw, which is called Come With Us, which is about Hispanic heritage. And it's like, no, it's not just pushing our audience out. It's not just pushing our community out. It's celebrating the accomplishments. It's talking the storytelling about what the great things that they're doing. But it's also telling people, come with us, because that's what inclusivity is, making sure that people feel that they can join and that it's not an other. And being a group and a segment that for so long has been considered an other, we've gone away from that. And it's like, no, we are 1 in every 5 Americans in this country. We are trendsetters, we are wealth creators. So come with us, join us, because we're fabulous. And I'll also say, Craig, to your point, we said we don't know if NBC is still sexy. I still think NBC is so sexy, because guess what? We get to create magic. So when you have magic, when you have fun, and when you have inclusivity, I think it really makes for a great initiative that we're working on.
Wow. Well, each of you, so I have a sort of a two-part question. You can answer it one of the parts, both parts. You don't have to answer it all. But a number of you talked about this, and it's the thing that I know that I have noticed, and I know you must have noticed it too, as the head of corporate diversity. The amount of outreach from our employees went up dramatically after May 25th, 2020, and the murder of George Floyd. And suddenly, or maybe not suddenly, but the frustration, the appropriate and understandable frustration just came to a boiling point. And employees reached out to me, who I'd never heard from them. They reached out to our CEO, Jeff Shell. They reached out to Comcast, our parent company's CEO, through email. I mean, these are people that would have never thought and said, what are you doing? What are we doing about this? So all companies, I think, are seeing a much higher degree of accountability that they expect from their senior leaders. They want us to speak out on some of these initiatives. Sometimes it can be a sensitive area. They want to hear from you on everything. Sometimes you can't speak out on everything. So the two-part question is, how are you facilitating in a healthy and manageable way hearing from your employees? Are you encouraging it? And once they've told you what they want, because you touched on something, Monica, when you say, come with us and tell us what you want and we hear you, you can't always deliver what they want. And as you said, sometimes a lot of people have a lot of good ideas, they're just not actionable. And sometimes, quite frankly, people have terrible ideas. And so, but they wanted to tell you about their idea. So no, some of these ideas stink. Let's just be really, really clear. And so how do you manage going back and saying, that's not an idea that works? And because when you say, tell us what you want, you created an expectation. And I know there's no perfect answer, but it's one I think that we've all grappled with. And I'd love to hear from any and all of you. I mean, if you want to start.
Sure. Two words that come to my mind are genuinely listening and transparency. So, Mars is actually a family-owned business, and we're very relationship-based.
That's right.
And we don't think in quarters, we think in generations. So this was a very deeply meaningful conversation, and we're not very hierarchical at all. Similar to you, you can email and stop anyone in the corridor, send them a Teams message to do a video chat, etc. And it's ensuring that it's not falling on tone-deaf ears, the true message that people are expressing in that moment. And then to the point about transparency about what is actionable and the progress and the cadence that we are striving towards. We're not there yet. We know that. But we're very honest about here's where we're starting from, here's where we're improving, and here's where we have further to go. And I love that we spoke about measurement. It's a critical part of driving progress. We're very open about that, internally as well as externally, in front and behind the camera.
All right, so it sounds like it's a combination of a lot of things. I mean, you are respectfully listening, but while managing. And I imagine getting back to people too, in some form, in some way, formally or informally.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that yes, showing up authentically, creating a psychological safety and a culture for people to share what they're thinking.
And how I have some ideas on how we think we do it. I'd love to hear on how you do that.
I think it's creating a safe space for vulnerability. And whether it's we have smaller groups, we have larger groups, we have all these different forums. I mean, our company is based on an ethos of you can sit on the floor and you listen, right? Whether it's in the store, whether it's in your Teams or on a Zoom. And so, psychological safety means it's okay. There's trust and there's mutual respect, and it's a culture that's not fear-based. That if I raise my hand and question. And I think, it works from top down to bottom up, right? Like, so you mentioned Doug McMillan, our global CEO. When I first came into the company, there was a film, it was, just a year ago, but there was a film on my onboarding, was Doug talking about the devastating murder of George Floyd and our company. And when you have a North Star and a purpose, and it's super clear, and you have someone express, we are committed to, because of our scope and size, to drive systemic cultural change. And if you're not on board, you should not be here. So when that message of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, which is so critical to the equation, comes from the top, and then you empower people from our associates on the floor and listening in our teams to say, what are you going to do about it, what you can do for me, leaning into individuals who may be at risk, and just creating safe spaces for that. And then, yes, you're right, everything's not actionable. I'm in the business of listening to ideas all day long. You break hearts all the time, not a good idea. Give them something positive to lead with is always my MO. There's always
thank them for actually for coming forward with it and explaining to them why it may not work today.
Absolutely. But then, and I also think the transparency in what we are doing. We commit right after that. We committed $100 million to the Center for Racial Equity to drive systemic change. Right. So, for example, funding the Ghetto Film School was something we did recently at the Hollywood Reporter event. And then thinking about things like we share our diversity data on an annual basis. There's a report that goes out public, and not all companies will do that. And so again, we talked about measurement, and there's another acronym. Well, Walmart's big on acronyms, by the way. I think I went easy today. I didn't speak in that. But there's a school, we work with the CHER and the ANA in some capacity with gender equality measurement. It's GEM score. And they talk, you can't treasure what you don't measure. And so really valuing those people and how we're showing up and being committed to, it's not quotas, but it's driving equity.
I love that, and I just to talk about NBC Universal for a minute, because I'm very proud. And when you said the 100 million, 14 days after George Floyd's murder, Brian Roberts announced a $100 million Comcast NBC Universal fund as well, which I was honored to help manage across the two companies. And as I said to Brian when he came to me with that, and I said, this is fantastic. It is nothing but fantastic. But I also want to tell you that if we had $100 billion, it would be hard to make any kind of change. So the 100 million is great. It is great. But we also need to think about what culturally can change, because otherwise it won't, it won't really matter. And he said, I understand what you're saying. And that's where I know that I think we are all very fortunate that we work for companies where it is a top-down priority. I was very struck, I know Ben Hassan quite well, and I've had the pleasure of coming here and speaking for Asian American Heritage Month, and I know ERGs are also a way that you...
Big deal, yeah.
That's another psychological safe space. But Ben told me about, he took some of your senior leadership, I think about 4 years ago, to the Legacy Museum. And I made that trip myself last year as a result of him telling me, and he took Doug, and I think it was a 2 or 3 day trip. I think they went to Selma, they also went to the memorial. And he said that the impact that it had on Doug, and what Doug said to him coming back from that trip, and this was a lived experience that Doug couldn't possibly, comprehend, which is just a fact, not a judgment. That is where you can really see change. This film that he made, that when he talks about it, that's when people know that they need to respond when it's important to the CEO.
And we're going on that journey as a team. Our marketing leadership team is taking that journey in the next 6 months. And I was so thrilled. Like, part of my officer onboarding at Walmart was education, race history, the history of race. We went through the center of race history as leaders of the company to have that context, because there's so much that we don't know.
Oh my God, there's
so much,
yes.
but again,
we haven't been taught.
Nope.
And we have not been. Yeah, no, it's been quite deliberate. There's no question. So Valerie, when you were talking about talking to your employees and hearing from your employees and how that worked for you, clearly, so they are feeling listened to. Can we return to this topic of how you solicit that feedback and how you deal with expectations that you're not going to be able to fulfill?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I love the examples that have been shared. There are moments that happen in our lives that you can remember where you were, what you were doing when you first heard about it, and how it struck you. We've had so many moments of trauma in this country, even within the last period of time, just looking at the news and just realizing that this is our reality, this is our lived experience, and how we respond to that in our homes and in our office place is so critically important. I remember soon after the George Floyd murder, our CEO rallied together a group of leaders to have what we call as a Stand as One meeting. That's a global town hall where every member was invited to that conversation. And I was invited. I'd only been in the company about 9-10 months when this happened, but I was invited to be a part of this conversation that was led by our CEO, who's based in London, by the way. So, coming from a very different experience, but he was so passionate about the conversation. I remember when he opened, he was so emotional. He was naming the recent tragedies with Trayvon Martin, Breonna Taylor. He said their names. And I could just sense and feel on the screen, people were just leaning in like, this can't be our reality. Soon, so we all gave our remarks there, and right after that, there was a call to action. I remember our then North America president said on the call, and Valerie Love will lead this initiative for U.S. social justice. And I'm like, yes, I will.
Have they told you?
No.
Oh.
But it became, because I'm passionate about diversity in every aspect, not just from
No, but you still could have gotten an email, just as a heads up.
It could never hurt to get that heads up so that you're like, oh yeah.
Right.
But yeah, so we moved right into action. And what made my heart warm was so many people that didn't look like me reached out and said, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get started, but I want to be a part of changing this narrative. So we galvanized teams. We talked about how to help people leaders have difficult conversations. Because oftentimes when someone that doesn't look like you comes to talk about, you don't know what to say, but you want to listen because listening is a start. But you want to be able to give them some tools and some things to think about and some actions to take and some projects to help them feel like they can impact change. So that started to happen. Then we launched this U.S. Social Justice Committee. I'm the chair, yay. But I love it, so I leaned into it. But then we started talking about our inclusion networks. Those are our employee resource groups. We renamed them to Inclusion Network because we really want to drive the notion of inclusion. You need to feel like you can belong in any setting, in any room in corporate America, in any forum outside of corporate America. Then we started what we called our Equity Accountability Councils. Now we're still in the process of standing that up, but what that looks like, it's a makeup of about 30% internal leaders and 70% external leaders to hold us accountable. What we say we're going to do, that we're doing it, because you're coming in, you're assessing, and you're going to give us feedback. So we're standing up those for Hispanic, Asian, and Black councils. And that's some really rewarding work that's starting to come together. And we're bringing in experts to kind of say, no, you said you were doing this, where are you? What measure gets improved? And so we're starting a lot of that work. And then just recently, our CEO, he never lacks ideas, stood up a U.S. Diverse Representation Task Force to say, I don't want to hear the talk. Show me what you're doing. I want the outcomes. And if you're not going to get the outcomes, I'll step in, and that's not what you want me to do. I want you to take the lead, make the adjustments, show me your progress, and let's make sure it's sustainable. So we're engaging our employees, because your employees are your best ambassadors inside of the company, but also to translate that story externally to the community to say, we are an employer of choice. We're on a journey. We don't always get it right. We get a lot of good feedback. Feedback is a gift. I keep reminding myself, it's a gift when they tell you didn't get that right. But it also is an opportunity for us to try to reset and make sure the things that we're doing are sustainable, they're realistic, so we can actually get it done. But it's been a rewarding piece of work to be on this journey. And Coca-Cola sits in civil rights mecca of the world.
Yep. Yeah. Ground zero.
I mean, everybody looks at Coke and say, I mean, you were there for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in his darkest hour, right there in Atlanta, Georgia. Are you telling me that you can't lead in this space? So we have work to do, but we've got a leader that's passionate about the space.
Wow. That's Monica, so as part of NBC Universal and yet as your own freestanding, iconic entity, how would you say that you are working to balance? Because I know that in your position, people come to you a lot.
Yeah.
You are a safe space for them, all employees.
Yeah, and you mentioned it, you all have mentioned it, really, that listen. I mean, the reality is that people want to be heard. They want a space to be able to share their ideas. And yes, I get crazy content ideas that are never going to come to life, but you have to listen, right? Because you know what? Maybe something will come out of that. What I have found is that you really have to create that safe space. But I think that the other thing that's really important is this concept of transparency is probably more important than it's ever been in our lives as a corporation, as a company. Because what I have found is that after George Floyd, after all of the COVID, the economic crisis that we had, the health crisis, there's so much uncertainty in the world that what really people wanted to was be heard, but at the same time, there was a lot of conversation about how quickly to move. And I firmly believe that you have to meet the company where it's at. And what happened after George Floyd is a lot of companies tried to go from 0 to 100, and that didn't work, because it became really quickly a downfall because they weren't able to implement or execute upon their promise. So employees really want to make sure that they have a safe space. And I like to say what we can measure in biteable chunks. Maybe a no to the content creation sparks an idea. Maybe a no just means not yet. And it's making sure that we're having conversations with employees that are transparent, that we're showing the biteable chunks, that we're listening to them more than ever in a safe space. And I think that the kind of the way that I would tie this is when your mission, your values really come to life. Because if your employees are changing, your employees are asking you to do things differently, they're presenting new ideas, I think this is when you have to go back to your mission and vision statement and ask yourself, okay, am I just staying stuck on where I'm at? Am I evolving with my community, with my consumer, with my employee? And is it something that I have to reevaluate and revisit? And to me, I believe that kind of the jobs that we do, we are all in executive roles. We have a privilege to create change, to service our audiences, our community. And this is an opportunity where even as leaders, we have to ask ourselves, am I doing the right thing for the company and for the employees? So I would say that this is right now when transparency, the mission and vision, and also over communicating. What we found is during the pandemic, employers became the most trusted source of information. They started leaning on us in different ways to make sure that we were communicating and giving them information that they didn't know. So they became, to your point, advocates because they felt that we were being truthful. You're saying, I have no idea what's going to happen next. And you're being honest with them. So it was communicating with transparency and over communicating. Because one of the things is that nobody knew, they were scared, they were fearful. So it was important. I would say kind of all of those things are how I have managed the expectations. And also, let's not also kind of put any, let's not kind of dilute the fact of the progress we have made, right? Because I think what we've seen also, there's been so much progress that we have made. Let's also celebrate those wins, because again, it's biteable chunks and demonstrating the biteable chunks regularly.
Can I just jump? I think there's so much about, I love what you all said, and this idea of being transparent and oversharing, sharing the progress, acknowledging it, and acknowledging where the errors are. When you make a mistake, own it, share it.
Authentically own it.
Authentically.
Just say, we just did that
We
wrong.
just messed up. No comment here, just what's going on. And then, no, I'm not saying that now, but just and saying, what did we learn from it? And what processes are we going to put into place that this doesn't happen again? And get back, and that again, that philosophy of better.
On this issue of transparency, one of the things we learned, and my colleague Pat is here, we were one of the first by many years in our industry to put our workforce demographic numbers out publicly. And and you spoke about this, you do want to think about that. You really do want to give that thought, because there can be so many ways that can go wrong when really you're just trying to be transparent. We were shocked, I will tell you, I believe, at the positive reaction, the lack of negative reaction, because what we quickly figured out is when you don't tell them, they're actually assuming it's worse than it is. And when you tell them, they're like, what are you hiding? And when you show them and say, yes, we definitely have work to do in this demo, we get it, and at this level, we get it, the reaction was like, okay. Because in the absence of information, they're filling in the blanks with their evil thoughts about, of what you're doing. But I'm also struck, and this is not an accident, that I'm looking across, I'm thinking about our leadership. I just learned a lot about your leadership, and hearing about that meeting is phenomenal. Monica and I share, a leadership, and my exposure to Doug, and then of course being reminded that this is a family-owned business. So these companies care deeply about these things because we have leaders that care deeply about it, and because in your case, that's their personal brand as well. So when I hear about some of the things you're doing, we're doing so many things in common, so many of the programs, and the overriding, I think, commonality is you can't just leave it to chance. It's a lot of programs, it takes a lot of people to run, it takes resources. You need money to run some of these programs, and you need to be looking for results.
I think you said it just right. The communicate and communicate often is important, because if you don't tell the story, they'll finish it themselves, and it's often not with accuracy. And then when you tell the story with transparency, there's less likelihood that people believe there's something you're trying to hide
That's right.
or not disclose. We did the same. We now include our diversity numbers in our ESG report. Just started that just over a year ago. And the other thing around diversity and equity inclusion, now our senior executives, a component of their compensation is tied to their diversity numbers. Talk about accountability.
That's right. That's
Get
right.
it where it really matters and say, you don't.
Like all of the other things you
Yeah.
expect from the leader.
Yeah,
in
yeah,
terms of that.
right.
Well, we have an hour, and I have another couple of questions. I can sit here and talk with you all day, but I did want to open it up to see if anybody in the audience had a question, because if not, I do have a couple, but if you do, I think we have time for one, if anybody had a question. All right, well, good, then I get to ask mine. Okay?
Going once.
Well, because when we're talking about, and I think this is not only about DEI, this is just about businesses. These are all old businesses versus the Facebooks or the Netflixes of the world. When you have a company that's been wildly successful, lauded as being expertly run, is pointed to very often as being as being sort of the beacon. How do we go in and act as change agents when some people are saying like, well, wait a minute, it's working fine. Like, don't make me do that a different way. Or why are we reimagining the M&Ms? Why are we setting up this fund to give away money? Why are we reorganizing? I mean, how do you do that in such a way that you acknowledge to people that yes, things are going well, and how do you make that case for driving change, whether it's purpose-driven or just for the strength or the future of the business?
So I'm probably going to, I saw this morning, I thought it was incredibly timely, and I'll probably butcher it, because it is, but we have a very clear North Star, which is that's what we're all there for, 130,000 associates over 80 countries. Wow. Grant has I'm definitely going to butcher it, performance without purpose is meaningless, and purpose without performance isn't sustainable. We are not just measured in financial performance. To your point, my IBOs are measured on the quality of the growth I'm driving through a very inclusive way as well. So I think, to your point, that is just such a simple North Star for us. We're very principally led. One of the unique principles about Mars is the financial freedom and the quality of the growth. So I think, yes, there's a lot of dynamic complexity that we're all living through and managing. And that's okay, that melting pot of conversation is what we really welcome. But we've always had a very simple North Star, and that keeps us all together about that. So I thought that quote was certainly not mine, but I thought it was a really appropriate, powerful way.
I don't think it didn't sound butchered, but so you're gonna have to
Especially
write it down for me. It sounded
so
really
eloquent.
Clearly he's far more eloquent than I am.
No,
but
really
it was such a, I saw it this morning and thought, that's exactly what this is about today. That's
and
what
you
it's
have to
about.
give people something they can keep going back to and reminding themselves, because like, why am I here? What am I doing? That's fantastic.
I think that North Star is so very important, that purpose, and I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek, who's start with the why, right? And if we start with the why as opposed to the what, because people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And so if you bring that purpose into it, and we continue to lead that way again. And I think there's another component. I'm going to quote somebody who quoted somebody that I'm probably definitely going to butcher it. And it's a sports quote, so it's totally out of my wheelhouse. But John Ferner, our U.S. CEO, quotes Wayne Gretzky, who talks about, I'm going where the puck is headed, where the puck is going, not where it's been. Right. And I think that's the future state of how we how we are a legacy brand founded on innovation and continue to innovate for the customer so we can help them live better. And so really thinking about how do we lighten the cognitive load of consumers, of our associates, and sometimes there's fear of innovation, there's fear of technology, it's going to replace, but it's really like, because it's moving so quickly, so we have to move quickly too. And I think there's a brilliant component, and I think you mentioned it, of legacy plus innovative thinking and marrying the two. So it's not like we're completely changing, right? We're going to help everybody elevate by bringing these minds together, because legacy folks have that deep brand knowledge and know how to get things, doors open. It can be tough in a big organization. We're 2 million associates, right? And so, you think about the evangelism that can happen and like how you operationalize everyone to move in the same direction for the customer experience and for the brand. But I do think that like take that deep brand knowledge, legacy experience, operational flywheel knowledge of how things work and how to open doors and where relationships sit, and then bring in innovative talent as well and diversity of thought to the table, like, and then have that culture of what if. Here's my ask. Here's what I'm asking you to do, or someone's asking you to do. And what I'm trying to tell my people is like, ask why, and ask what if, and ask why Walmart, and what if we should be doing it, and being choiceful with those things that we do, because we're following that purpose.
Wonderful.
I love the book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. So it's all about how you keep reimagining and reinventing yourself. Our CEO talks about being the best at getting better. Always looking at what is the external market looking for, especially we're a 136-year-old company now, I think, Pam. So we are a story recognized brand around the world. There's nowhere you'd go that when someone says Coca-Cola, you don't think about the first time you had our beverages. And now we want a vast portfolio of products from cradle to grave. Now we have milk, we have juices, we have water, we have hard seltzer, we have every category that we believe our consumers would want. So in order for us to continue to advance, we honor the legacy, because we know what trademark Coke means to the Coca-Cola company, but we have to be forward thinking and always getting ahead of what we believe the consumer and the customer is looking for, so that keeps us relevant. So to get stuck in, we've had 136 years of a storied, successful brand, we're going to lose, because the competition is always looking at how do we think about what
And
the
consumer
future
tastes are changing. That's
the
right.
tastes are changing, mine has changed,
Yep.
everyone's changed, but also that element of the environment, sustainability. People want to know that they're connecting with a company that wants to do good outside of the four walls of a corporation. What are you doing for the environment? What are you giving back in the community? Sustainability with plastic, less sugar in our beverages, bringing clean water where otherwise
no
there
water.
wouldn't be.
Yeah.
I mean, all of that is so important. So that causes us to keep innovation at the forefront, and our employees love it because they feel good telling the story to their family and in their community. Look what Coke
making
is
a
doing
difference.
that's beyond the P&L.
Yeah. Monica, we'll give you the last word.
I mean, and I kind of just, to echo everybody, I think for me, yes, the purpose and your values are the most important, but also it's kind of not hard in the sense that keeping up with the consumer is a lot easier than catching up to the community and to the consumer. So for me, I really look at that. Are we keeping pace with what our community is asking? Are we keeping pace with what the consumer products and demand are? So I really do envision that as the way that we continue to check ourselves. You know, it's kind of like a will. We are living trust. You've got to fix it every 3 years or what have you. You've got to check it because life changes, right? So you have to continue to do that regularly with your company. And I'll quote somebody as well. Melody Hobson would say, you know, it's not about being colorblind, it's about being courageous. And I think Maya Angelou always used to say, it's not what you say, what you do, but how you make people feel. And I think we have to ask ourselves, how do people feel when you hear Mars, when you hear Walmart, when you hear Coca-Cola? Because if they have that positive feeling, that means they love your brand. And what's better than creating love for your brand by the things that you do?
I think that connects to, I know you were going to give it the last word and I jumped in. I did that.
No, I was just going to say that I was going to let Maya Angelou have the last word, but you go ahead. No, actually, no, and actually, as I know that you're not based here, but as our host, as Walmart in Bentonville, you should have last word.
Well, amazing words expressed by this whole panel, and I've learned so much. What you said made me think about how we have shared like values and value, right? Like, if people just came to us for the lowest price, then they can go to anybody for the lowest price. And so, we want people to love us and be shared heart. Yeah. So everything you said about the environment, our commitment to sustainability, our commitment to equity, and just helping all people live better. It isn't hard. It isn't hard. If we all get behind it as a planet, as a country, we're a country divided, and I think there's a lot more that connects us than divides us. So trying to stay true to that humanity is really important.
That's a wonderful final word. I do a lot of these events I moderate a lot of them. I don't always learn something from some of them, I'll just be very honest. I learned a lot. This was one of the favorite conversations I've ever had. Thank you to all of you. Thank you for your time and coming spending it with us.